The night is dark and echoing of vampires.
Chicago, Illinois, October 1918. The city was dying by degrees. This was not metaphor and was not the observation of someone given to the dramatic register. It was the plain, administrative fact of a metropolis in the grip of the Spanish influenza, which had arrived in Chicago in late September and had been doing its work ever since with the patient. Systematic thoroughness of something that did not distinguish between the worthy and the unworthy, the prepared and the unprepared. The 17-year-old daughter of a bookseller on the north side, and the 17-year-old son of the attorney whose office occupied the building 3 doors down. The bookseller's daughter was named Isabella Swan, though no one called her that except her father when he was cataloging something and needed her attention. She went by Bella and had gone by Bella since she was 4, which was when she had decided that Isabella was too many syllables for something that needed to be said frequently. The attorney's son was named Edward Anthony Masen, Jr., which was a great deal of name for a slender, pale-complexioned boy who had been reading the books in Mr. Swan's shop since he was 12 and had developed, across 5 years of that practice, a habit of also talking to the shopkeeper's daughter about what he read. The talking had developed into something else, as talking does when it continues long enough between two people who are paying attention. The summer of 1918 was the summer they understood what the something else was. Edward came in on a Tuesday in June with a book he had read twice, because he could not account for the first reading. He had been reading it and had not been reading it, had been in the room with the words without the words landing. And he had gone back to the beginning and found that the second reading was equally difficult, which he recognized as data rather than literary deficiency. He had put the book on the counter. And Bella had looked up from the inventory she was keeping. She kept the inventory every Tuesday, the condition of her father's organizational system requiring weekly intervention, and she had seen his face. "You look confused," she said. "I've been reading this twice," he said. "I can't account for it." She looked at the book, which was Middlemarch, which she had read once and found entirely accountable. "I can account for it," she said. He had looked at her then with the quality that his looking had begun to have across the spring, the quality she had been cataloging without naming, the quality of someone paying full attention to a thing they had previously believed they understood and finding the understanding insufficient. "Tell me," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "You're not reading it," she said. "You're here." He said yes. She said then stop pretending to read it. He had put the book down. The Tuesday afternoons after that were not about the books, though the books were still there and were still discussed, because the books were the infrastructure, and infrastructure served the function it served regardless of whether that function was the announced one. They talked about other things, about the war in Europe that had taken Edward's best friend the previous year and had sent his draft notification in March and had been delayed by the Army's determination to wait until he was 18, which would be in June, which was coming. About what the waiting felt like from inside it. About what it felt like to be a girl in a year when girls were not asked about the things that were happening around them and were expected to manage their days in the shape of the days that had preceded them. She had opinions about this. He listened to the opinions with the quality that she had come to understand was his baseline for receiving her specifically, which was the quality of someone who had decided that what she said was worth the full application of his attention. The draft notice had been canceled. Not because the war ended, and not because the Army had reconsidered, but because the influenza arrived in September and had opinions of its own about the summer's plans. Mrs. Elizabeth Masen contracted the influenza on the 3rd of October. Bella heard this from her father, who heard it from the attorney's housekeeper, who had come to the shop for something and had told him with the quality of someone who was reporting a development rather than delivering news, because by October the developments had the quality of weather, present, relentless. Not personalized. She went to the Mason house that afternoon. She went without thinking about whether she was going, which was the nature of decisions that had been made somewhere below the level of deciding, the body executing the choice before the mind had finished constructing the reasons for it. She brought a book, because bringing a book was the gesture available to her, the thing that could be offered at the door of someone who was managing something large and could not receive large things. Edward opened the door. His face had the quality it had had in June when he put Middlemarch on the counter, the quality of someone who had been attending to something that was not the thing they were telling themselves they were attending to, except the June version had been colored by something soft and uncertain, and this version had no softness in it at all. "She's worse today," he said. "I know," Bella said. "I heard." "You came," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her standing at the door, and the looking had the quality she had spent the summer learning, and the look collapsed something in the distance between the door and him. Not physically, but in the way that things collapsed when they were found to have never been quite the distance they appeared. He said, "Come in." Elizabeth Masen died on the 14th of October. Edward was with her. Bella was in the hall, which was the place available to her. She had been in the hall or the kitchen or the front room for 11 days. There when Edward needed the house to contain someone other than himself. There in the way that presence was a thing distinct from assistance, and sometimes more necessary than assistance. The evening of the 14th had the quality that the evenings of that October all had, the specific, the close, still quality of a room that had received everything it was going to receive and was waiting to know what came after. Edward came out of his mother's room at 9:15. He came out and Bella was in the hall, and she saw his face and she did not say anything, because there was nothing to say, and she had learned across 11 days that silence offered as presence was different from silence offered as absence. He sat down on the hall floor. She sat beside him. They sat on the floor of the Masen house for an hour, and then 2. And the house held the quiet of a place where something had ended, and outside the city continued its dying by degrees. Edward collapsed on the 19th. She heard this from her father at breakfast, and she was at the Masen house within the hour, which was where she had been every day in the intervening 5 days, managing the housekeeper's grief and the household's continuation, and the mountain of administrative matters that attended the death of a respectable woman in a respectable household. She went upstairs. He was in his bed with the quality that the influenza produced, which was the quality of something burning from the inside, the specific fever flush that she had seen in the hospital volunteers' descriptions, the shallow, fast breathing, the skin that was hot in the way of something that had exceeded its thermal range. She sat beside him. She said his name. He opened his eyes. The quality of his eyes through the fever had the particular, displaced clarity of someone whose surface processing had been simplified down by illness to the thing underneath the processing. He looked at her with that clarity and said, "You should go." "No," she said. "Bella, no," she said again, with the quality she had used in June when she told him to stop pretending to read the book. The quality that was not unkind and was not movable. He closed his eyes. She sat. She contracted the influenza on the 22nd. She had known she would. This was not prescience and was not fatalism. It was the arithmetic of 11 days in an infected household at close range, with someone who was now into his 3rd day of the fever. The arithmetic that anyone who was paying attention would have arrived at. She had been paying attention and had arrived at it early, and had decided the arithmetic was not the variable she was going to organize her choices around. She went home to the shop because there was nowhere else to go. Her father was in his sister's house in Wisconsin. Sent there on the 8th when the local case counts had crossed his threshold, and before Bella could tell him about the Masens, which she had not told him, because telling him would have required addressing the threshold question. She went to bed. She burned. The man who came on the 24th was not a man she had seen before. She would not know his name until later. She would not know much about the 24th beyond the sensation of it, which was the fever at its outermost edge, the burning at the limit of what burning could be, and still leave a person in a position to receive information. What she received was this: his face above hers, pale, composed, with the quality of someone who had been making decisions in rooms with this quality of person, this quality of dying, for longer than she could estimate. He had a doctor's bag. He had the manner of medicine but the feel of something older than medicine. He said, "Your friend sent me." She said, "Edward." "He's alive," the man said. "He told me about you." He asked. She understood that she was dying. She had understood this since the 22nd. She understood that the man with the doctor's bag was offering something. She said, "What are you asking?" He said, "Whether you want to live." She looked at the ceiling of her father's house, the ceiling above the shop, the ceiling she had looked at from this bed since she was 4 years old and had moved into the room above the books. She looked at it with the fever doing what the fever was doing, and she thought about Edward on the 19th opening his eyes and looking at her with the clarity that the fever produced. She said, "Yes." The bite when it came was not what pain had been. It was the beginning of something larger than pain, which arrived the way the influenza had arrived, at first as something she could observe, then as something she was inside, then as the only thing there was. The ceiling went away. The fire came. Chicago, Illinois, October 1918. 3 days later, the fire went out. Not gradually. This had been the quality of it for 3 days. The specific, the gradual was wrong. had always been wrong for what the fire actually did, which was persist and persist and persist until it did not. The removal of it arriving the way the burning had arrived, all at once, the total displacement of one state by another with no interval between them. Bella Swan opened her eyes. The ceiling was not her ceiling. This was the first information, and it arrived with the complete simultaneous quality of everything that arrived now, which was the way she would describe it later. When she had the vocabulary, everything at once, every detail of the ceiling present to her simultaneously, rather than in the sequence her human eyes had moved through the world. The ceiling was plaster, pale, with a water stain in the northwest quadrant from something that had happened before the house was furnished, the shape of the stain like a continent she could not identify. She knew it was northwest because she knew which direction north was from the quality of the light through the window to her right, which told her it was morning, because the light was the specific temperature and angle of morning rather than afternoon, and she knew this without having made the calculation. She sat up. The sitting up happened differently than it had happened before, which was the second information, not the managed incremental transition of a body negotiating with gravity, but the immediate arrival at the intended position, the sitting up having no duration. She was lying, and then she was sitting, and the intermediate states had not been available for observation. She looked at the room. The room was a bedroom she did not recognize in a house she did not recognize, furnished with the careful quality of someone who had furnished it recently and deliberately, the furniture present but not accumulated, the kind of presence that was arrangement rather than habitation. A wardrobe, a washstand, a chair near the door. In the chair, watching her, was the man with the doctor's bag. "Good morning, Miss Swan," he said. His voice had the quality she remembered from the 24th, the quality of someone who was managing how much of themselves they were presenting, who had a default register for exactly this kind of moment. He was pale, very pale. With the pale that she understood now from the inside was not the pale of illness, but the pale of something that had reorganized its relationship with biology. She understood what she was. She understood it the way she had understood things since waking, which was without the process of arriving at understanding. The understanding was simply present, assembled from the available information before she had decided to assemble it. "Carlisle," she said. He looked at her. "You told me your name on the 24th, she said. "I heard it. I was still receiving information when you thought I wasn't. I remember telling you," he said. "I wasn't certain you would retain it. I retain everything now," she said. "Is that—" "Yes," he said. "That's standard." "Standard." She sat with the word. "Edward," she said. He was in the next room. She knew this before Carlisle said anything, because she could hear him, not the way she had heard things before, not the approximate, managed hearing of human ears processing the ambient, but the complete reception of every sound in every room of the house, layered and simultaneous and individually distinguishable. She could hear Edward in the next room the way she could see the water stain in the northwest corner, which was to say completely, which was to say it was simply the case. He was still. The stillness had the quality she would come to understand as the vampire's resting quality, the stillness of something that did not have the biological urgency of a human body's constant micro-adjustments. But she did not know this yet. What she knew was that he was still and was still in the specific, in the particular way of something that was listening, and what it was listening to was her. He had heard her wake up. She had heard him hear her wake up. Carlisle said, "He woke 4 hours ago." "Is he all right?" she said. "He's managing," Carlisle said. "The first hours are difficult. Because of the thirst," she said. The thirst was present. She had been aware of it since the ceiling, which was to say from the first moment of the new existence, which was the order of things. First the world at full resolution, and running alongside the full resolution like a second channel, the thirst. It was the specific quality of a need that was not human hunger, was not the graduated, politely announced requirement that the body had been requesting food with for 17 years. It was a demand. It was the full, unambiguous statement of what the body now required, delivered at a volume that did not reduce when she noted it. She was noting it and holding it separate from herself the way she had been holding things separate from herself across 3 days of the burning, which was the practice she had developed because the burning required a particular management, the placement of something overwhelming at a distance from the thinking self so the thinking self could continue to function. She had learned to manage the fire. She could manage the thirst. "Yes," Carlisle said, with the quality of someone who was receiving this information and adding it to an assessment. Because of the thirst, and because everything arrives at once and the arriving needs time to sort itself. Has it sorted for him? She said. He's beginning, Carlisle said. He has a gift which complicates it. A gift, she said. A capability, you might say. Something that was latent in him as a human and has become significantly more present. He can hear people's thoughts, everyone's, at range. Carlisle paused. It was overwhelming at first. It is somewhat less overwhelming now. She looked at the wall between the rooms. She thought about Edward on a Tuesday afternoon in June putting Middlemarch on the counter. And she thought about what Tuesday afternoons in a bookshop sounded like to someone who was hearing every thought of every person in the building simultaneously, and she found she needed a moment with that thought. Can he hear mine? She said. No, Carlisle said, with the quality of someone for whom this was also notable. He cannot. Which is also unprecedented in my experience. She looked at her hands. Her hands were pale in the new way, the cold pale of what she was, and were her hands, which she knew the way she knew the water stain, completely and all at once, the small scar on her left palm from a fall in the shop's back room at 14, and the particular way her right index finger curved, the thing her father had always said she got from her mother who was in Phoenix, her father who was in Wisconsin. She put that thought somewhere and left it there. I'd like to see him, she said. Carlisle opened the door between the rooms. She stood in the doorway. Edward was at the room's far window with his back to her, which was the position she recognized from the last week of October before the 22nd. The position of someone who was managing what they were facing by not facing it, who was using the window as an alternative orientation point. The morning light that had told her which direction north was came through this window too and landed on him differently than it had ever landed on him before, which was to say it landed on him the way light landed on something that did not absorb it, the way living things absorbed it. He was very still. She said his name. He turned. The quality of his face was not the quality she had been building a catalog of across 5 years of Tuesday afternoons and one summer and 11 days in a hall. It was that face. Recognizably, undeniably that face. And it was doing something that face had not done before, which was to receive her from inside whatever the new existence was. From inside the first 4 hours of it with the full resolution and the thirst and the thoughts of the entire city arriving whether he wanted them to or not. He said, "You're awake." "Yes," she said. "You were." He stopped. Started again. "I woke up and you weren't." Carlisle said it was normal, that the timing varied, that 4 hours was nothing, and He stopped again. "I know it's irrational. I know 4 hours is nothing. I've been alive, I've been existing for 4 hours, that's—" "Edward," she said. He stopped. She crossed the room to him. He watched her cross the room with the quality of someone who was receiving everything. Her approach. The sound of her footsteps which were not footsteps anymore in the way footsteps were footsteps. The quality of the air moving around her movement. And his face was doing the thing it had done in June when he put the book on the counter and she told him to stop pretending to read it. The quality of full attention applied to something he had thought he understood and was finding he did not. She was 3 feet from him when she stopped. Up close, at this range, with the new resolution. The quality of him was completely present to her in a way that 17 years of human proximity had not made available. The pale, the cold, the specific, the particular way he was holding his hands, which were at his sides with the deliberate quality of something that had been placed there rather than hanging naturally. He was managing the thirst by holding very still, and she recognized the strategy because it was the same strategy she had been using since the ceiling. "The thoughts," she said. "Are they loud?" "Very," he said. "Can you hear mine?" she said. "No," he said, with the quality of something saying a true thing that surprised it by being true. "There's nothing. Where your thoughts should be, it's not silence, it's not an empty space. It's the quality of a room that's fully occupied and completely closed." He looked at her. "I can't read you at all." "Good," she said. He looked at her. "You always could," she said. "Before you always read the room correctly and you always read me correctly, and I never had a thought in your presence that wasn't." She stopped. "It's good that this is the thing that's mine. The inside is mine." He was very quiet. "What are you going to do with the thoughts?" she said. "The ones from outside." "I don't know yet," he said. Carlisle says it becomes, not manageable exactly, but something that can be worked with. He says the first hours are the worst because there's no sorting yet. "We'll sort it," she said. She said it the way she had said no in the hall, the quality that was not movable, and he received it in the way he had received that no, which was completely. Together, he said, not a question. We woke up together, she said. I don't know what together looks like for whatever we are now, but we started it the same way. 4 hours apart, but the same way. She held his eyes. I think that counts. Carlisle was in the doorway. He looked at the two of them, at the space between them and the quality of the space, at the specific arrangement of two people who had arrived at the same destination by slightly different routes and were orienting toward each other with the specific quality of people who had been doing that, without knowing it was what they were doing. Since a Tuesday afternoon in a bookshop in June. He said, "You'll both need to feed today." The thirst had an opinion about this. She looked at Edward. Edward looked at her. "All right," she said, to Carlisle. "All right," Edward said. The morning light continued through the window of the house that was not her house and was not his house. And the city outside continued its particular October rhythm of dying and surviving, and the arithmetic of which was which, and inside the room 2 people who had been dying and had not were beginning the sorting, which was going to take longer than a morning and less than a lifetime, because lifetime was not the relevant unit of measurement anymore. They were beginning it together. That counted. Chicago, October 1918. The first week. The first feed happened in a slaughterhouse district at 4 a.m. Carlisle had chosen the time and location with the specific, practiced attention of someone who had done this many times, and understood that the variables requiring management were numerous, and that the management of them was the difference between the first feed being something a person survived and something a person did not come back from the same way. 4 a.m. was the hour when the slaughterhouse district had its workers, but not its witnesses. When the smell was present and overwhelming, and had been present and overwhelming long enough, that the humans in it had been desensitized to it in the specific way humans desensitized to ambient conditions. The smell had not desensitized Bella. She stood at the district's edge and received the smell the way she was receiving everything, completely, without the filtering her human nose had applied to unpleasant inputs. The filtering that had always been the body's charitable reduction of what was actually there. What was actually there, received at full resolution, was blood in quantities that her new biology was not able to receive as anything other than the most immediate fact in the world. The thirst stated its position. She held it. She held it the way she had been holding it for the 12 hours since waking, which was the same way she had held the fire, the placement of the demand at a specific distance from the thinking self so the thinking self could continue to operate. The distance was not comfortable. The distance was what she had. Edward was beside her. He was receiving the same thing she was receiving, which she knew not because she could hear his thoughts, she had not been able to hear anyone's thoughts, which Carlisle had told her was unusual and which she was filing as a fact about herself for later examination, but because she could read his face at the resolution that the new existence provided, which was the resolution of every micro-expression and every quality of stillness, and what she was reading in his face was the same demand she was holding at distance. "All right," Carlisle said, from behind them. "The first time is the most difficult. Not because the thirst is worse. It is not worse than it will ever be again. It is in fact at its most demanding right now, and will become more manageable with time and practice. The first time is difficult because you don't know yet that you can manage it." He paused. "You can manage it. I want you to know that before we go in." She looked at Edward. Edward looked at her. They went in. Afterward, she stood in the early morning of the district's edge, and the thirst had gone from the quality of a demand to the quality of a condition, which was the difference between something that was active and something that was present, and she was learning that the difference was significant. Edward was 6 feet away. He had the quality he had at the window of the unfamiliar room, the very still quality, the specific stillness of someone who was managing many things and had chosen stillness as the management method. She had been watching him manage across 12 hours, and she was building the catalog of his management strategies the way she had been building catalogs of him for 5 years, with the specific attention of someone who found the subject worth attending to. "The thoughts," she said. "Are they still loud?" "Less," he said. The feed helped. "How less?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "It's not that they're quieter," he said. "It's that there's more of me to receive them with. More capacity available. When the thirst is at its full volume, there's less room for anything else, so the thoughts arrive and there's nowhere to put them, and they pile up." He looked at his hands. When the thirst is reduced, there's room to sort. What does sorting look like? She said. I don't know yet, he said. Carlisle says it looks different for everyone. He says some people learn to background it, the way you background ambient sound. To make it something that's there but not the thing that's loudest. But right now it's the loudest, she said. Except for the thirst, he said. When the thirst is active, the thirst is the loudest. And when neither is the loudest, she said. He looked at her. What do you hear? She said. He was quiet for a moment. Carlisle, he said. His thoughts have a quality I recognize from the outside of them. They have a physician's organization. Things in categories. The constant cross-referencing of the current situation against the accumulated experience of 300 years. He thinks the way I imagine very good libraries work. He paused. And everyone else. The humans. There are layers to a human mind that I didn't expect. Surface thoughts that are almost words. Underneath those, other things. Images. Feelings that haven't become thoughts yet. It's not linear. I thought it would be linear. She was listening. And none of it is yours, he said. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Everyone in a quarter-mile radius, and you're beside me, and there's nothing. He looked at her with the quality the June lookings had had, the quality of someone finding their understanding of a thing insufficient. I didn't know I'd feel the difference. What does it feel like? She said. The nothing. He looked at the district, at the early morning of a city that was still dying by degrees and would continue dying for another month before the influenza receded, at the specific quality of October light on industrial architecture. Quiet, he said. The inside of it's the one place in the world where there's nothing coming in, like a room where all the windows are closed, and the walls are good walls. He paused. I've been outside for 12 hours, and everywhere I go there are people thinking things, and I receive all of them, and the receiving it's the price of the gift. It's the thing that comes with the gift, and the gift does not ask you whether you want to pay it. She looked at him. And then there's you, he said, and the room is closed, and it's quiet. She sat with this. That's what I am to you, she said. The quiet. That's part of what you are to me, he said. Yes, she looked at the district. She thought about June, about the book on the counter, about telling him to stop pretending to read it. She thought about the hall outside his mother's room, about the floor of the hall and the 2 hours of sitting. She thought about the 22nd, which was the day she had decided the arithmetic was not the variable she was going to organize her choices around. I've been trying to figure out, she said, what my equivalent is. He looked at her. You have the quiet, she said. Something that's different from everything else. Something that's specifically about me. She held his eyes. I've been trying to figure out what I have that's specifically about you. What's different when you're here versus when you're not. He waited. I think it's the opposite, she said. I think you're the thing that makes everything louder. Not the world. When you're in the room, the resolution goes up. Everything I'm already receiving at full resolution goes up one more level. She paused. It's not comfortable. It's not supposed to be comfortable, I think. It's the quality of something that matters enough to be worth the discomfort. He was very still. So we're each other's difficulty, he said, and each other's answer to it, she said. Carlisle was waiting at the district's edge. He had the quality he maintained when he was giving them space while being present in case the space needed to end, the practiced quality of someone who had done this many times and knew the difference between the space that was necessary and the space that had run its course. She looked at Edward. He looked at her. They walked back to Carlisle together. The sorting, Edward said, as they walked. Yes, she said. It might take some time, he said. Most things worth sorting do, she said. He made a sound that was the sound she had been hearing since June, the one that arrived when something she said caught him by surprise even when it shouldn't have, because she was Bella, and she had been saying things that caught him by surprise for 5 years. The sound of him not quite managing to pretend the surprise hadn't arrived. She filed it. She had a very good filing system. She was going to need it. November 1918. Wisconsin, then Ohio. Then Pennsylvania. They moved every 2 weeks. This was Carlisle's protocol, and he had explained it with the flat, practical clarity he brought to all operational matters. A new vampire in a location for more than 2 weeks began to be noticed, not dramatically, not with the theatrical quality of someone identifying a supernatural creature, but in the small, accumulating ways that human perception operated when it was paying attention to something it could not categorize. The neighbor who looked twice. The shopkeeper who asked where she was from a second time, which was not casual. The quality of human attention that preceded human suspicion by just enough that departure before suspicion was the only clean option. They moved. They learned. They fed. This was the architecture of the first months, and within the architecture. In the spaces between the feeding and the moving and the learning that Carlisle provided in the specific, organized way of someone who had been doing this for 200 years and had arrived at a curriculum, was the other thing. The other thing did not have a name yet. Wisconsin was where they learned to be still. Not the stillness of management, not the specific. Loaded stillness of vampires managing the thirst, or managing the thoughts, or managing the overwhelming resolution of the world arriving at full volume. The other kind. The kind that was simply the quality of two people occupying the same space in the late afternoon when the things that needed managing were at a lower level. They sat in the house that Carlisle had arranged, a rented farmhouse outside Milwaukee, set far enough from the town to give Edward's gift the distance it needed to function at below its most taxing register, and they sat in the room with the window that faced west, and the light did what late afternoon light did in November in Wisconsin, which was go sideways through the bare trees and make everything legible in a way it was not legible in summer. Edward read. He had been reading since the third day, which was when Carlisle had produced books from somewhere, with the quality of someone who had understood that the thing Edward needed was not more instruction, but the specific, familiar texture of what he had always been. He was reading, and the reading was different from the reading it had been in the bookshop. Not worse, not better in all dimensions. Different. He received the text now the way he received everything. Completely. The book organizing itself into his memory the way other information organized itself. The retention complete and immediate and without the effort that retention had previously required. Bella was watching the light. This was what she had found in the first 2 weeks, that watching was the thing available to her that required the least management while producing the most return. She had the resolution. She had the complete, simultaneous arrival of everything a space contained. Watching the light move through the bare trees gave her those things at their full value without the thirst or the thoughts or the sorting as competing inputs. "What are you doing?" Edward said, not looking up. "Watching the light," she said. "You've been watching it for an hour," he said. "It's different every minute," she said. In the old, she stopped. The phrase she had been going to use was the old life, which was accurate and had a quality that she was still learning how to carry. Before, an hour of watching light was an hour of missing things. Now, it's an hour of the light. He looked up from the book. He looked at her with the quality she was still building the catalog for. The quality of someone for whom the resolution problem worked in a specific direction. He could not hear her thoughts, could not receive what she was thinking the way he received every other mind in range, and the absence meant he was reading her through every other available channel at the full resolution that the new existence provided. It was the most comprehensive attention she had ever received from a person. She had been receiving it for 3 weeks. She was not accustomed to it. She was not sure accustomed was the right goal. Ohio was where they had their first argument. It was about nothing that was actually what it was about, which was the quality of arguments between people who are navigating something large and have found, in the architecture of the large thing, a small thing that serves as the available container for the large thing's pressure. The small thing was hunting. The large thing was the specific. Grinding reality of choosing the animal diet as a permanent condition, which Carlisle had presented as both a moral framework and a practical one, and which Edward had adopted with a thoroughness that sometimes expressed itself as the specific moralistic rigidity of someone who was using the moral framework to manage something that the moral framework was not entirely adequate to manage. She hunted differently than he hunted. She was more efficient. This was not a quality she had sought. It was the quality of someone who had grown up in a house where efficiency was the condition of survival, who had managed a bookshop's inventory at 14 and her father's finances at 15, and the gap between what the shop earned and what her father believed it earned at 16 and had developed across those years. The specific economy of motion of someone for whom waste was not available as an option. She hunted efficiently. Edward found it unsettling. "You don't have to," he said, after the third hunt in Ohio. "I know what I don't have to do," she said. "I'm not criticizing, you're criticizing," she said. "You're criticizing in the way you do when you've decided something is correct, and anyone who does it differently is implicitly doing it wrong." She held his eyes. "You've been doing this for 3 weeks. I've been doing this for 3 weeks. Neither of us has 3 weeks more authority than the other." He was quiet. Carlisle has 300 years, she said. I'll take Carlisle's opinion about whether I'm doing this wrong. I'm less interested in yours right now. The farmhouse outside Cleveland held them in the specific quality of the argument's aftermath, which was not silence. It was the presence of two people who had said something true and were sitting with the truth having been said. You're right, he said. She looked at him. I know you're right, he said. I heard it before you said it. That's the problem. He looked at his hands. I hear things before they arrive, and I have to manage knowing the thing before the saying of it, and sometimes the management, sometimes the knowing makes me want to prevent the saying, because the saying means the knowing has to be received as the thing it is, rather than as something I was already working with. She sat with this. You heard me about to tell you that you were being rigid, she said. Yes, he said. And you tried to intercept it, she said. Yes, he said. Edward, she said, I can't live inside a conversation you've already had in your head. He looked at her with the quality of the June lookings. I know, he said. I'm learning the cost of the gift. Tell me when you're doing it, she said. That's all. Don't intercept. Just tell me. I heard what's coming, and we'll manage it from there together. He looked at her. You are extraordinarily reasonable, he said. I have a very good filing system, she said. The quality arrived in his face, the one from June, the one she had been filing since June, the one that she had more resolution on now than she'd had then. She filed the updated version. Pennsylvania was where the name for the other thing arrived. They were in a house outside Philadelphia, and it was December, and they had been vampires for 6 weeks, which was long enough that the sorting was beginning, and the thirst was at the level of condition rather than demand, and the thoughts for Edward were at the level of background noise rather than the thing that was loudest. They were at the window. Not the same window as Wisconsin, a different window, the window that came with the Pennsylvania house, but the same quality of window in the sense that it faced west, and the bare trees were different bare trees, with the same late afternoon light doing the same sideways thing through them. She said, I keep thinking about my father. He said, I know. She looked at him. Not from your thoughts, he said, from the quality of you when you've been thinking about him. There's something that happens to the room when you're thinking about something that costs you, and I've learned to read it. She turned back to the window. He's in Wisconsin, she said. He came back to Forks at some point, I don't know when. He'll have looked for me. She was quiet for a moment. He'll have found nothing. Yes, Edward said. And your father, she said. Your real father. Not Carlisle. He died 2 years ago, Edward said. Before, I never told you. She looked at him. In the shop, he said. I was there and I knew and I didn't. He stopped. I didn't know how to say it in a way that didn't make it the thing it was. She put her hand on his. The cold of her hand on the cold of his was the thing she had found in 6 weeks to be the most consistently true fact about what they were. Not the thirst, and not the gifts, and not the perpetual November light through perpetual bare trees, but this, which was that the cold was the same on both sides of the contact, and the sameness was its own variety of warmth. We're each other's context now, she said, for the things that cost us. We're the people who know what the costs were. He turned his hand over under hers. That's the word for it, he said. The thing I've been trying to name since the bookshop. She waited. Context, he said. We're each other's context. Not just, he paused, not just the quiet, for me. Not just the room where the windows are closed. Something more than that. The thing that makes the room worth being closed into. She looked at the window. Yes, she said. They stayed at the window while the light ran out. Outside, December arrived in Pennsylvania the way December arrived in Pennsylvania. Completely, without negotiating the transition. The cold that was not their cold settling over the bare trees and the farmhouse, and the road that would take them somewhere else in 2 weeks. Inside, the context held. Forks, Washington, April 1919. 6 months. That was the interval Carlisle had specified as the minimum before returning to any location that had known them as human, and the specification had the quality of all Carlisle's operational guidelines, not arbitrary, not the product of excessive caution, but the distillation of experience that had been purchased at significant cost, and was being offered to them at a discount. 6 months was the interval at which the most immediate human attention had generally moved on to other things, not forgotten, not resolved, but moved on, which was the practical quality of human attention in the face of loss, that it found the shape it was going to live inside and settled into that shape rather than continuing in the acute register of the immediate aftermath. 6 months. She had counted them. They came to Forks on a Thursday morning in April, not together. This was the specific operational decision Carlisle had made, and that she and Edward had agreed to. The recognition that together was a visible configuration, and visible was the thing they were managing against. Carlisle stayed at the house he had arranged outside town. Edward stayed at the house. She went into Forks alone. She went on foot, which was the obvious choice for the obvious reasons. A car would require parking, and parking created the specific, witnessed quality of presence that was different from the specific, unwitnessed quality of someone moving through the woods at the edges of town, at the pace that the woods at the edges of town permitted. The pace the woods at the edges of town permitted was her pace now. April in the Olympic Peninsula was the specific April of a place that did not have the theatrical quality of spring arrivals elsewhere. No dramatic thaw, no sudden warmth, just the incremental, committed shift from the February version of gray to the April version, which had in it the possibility of green returning and delivered on the possibility without announcement. She moved through the greening at the speed she moved through everything now, and the greening arrived to her at the resolution everything arrived, which was completely. She was receiving the town before she reached it. Her father's house was on a corner. She had grown up in the apartment above the shop, which was in Port Angeles rather than Forks. She had been visiting Forks when the influenza arrived, had been at the Masen house because Edward had sent Carlisle and Carlisle had come to her. But she knew which house was his, had passed it on the occasion she had come with him to Forks in the years before. And she had found it from the edge of town by the specific, individual quality of the single human heartbeat inside it. She stood in the trees at the property's north edge. The house was a small, practical house, the kind of house that belonged to a man for whom the house was not a statement but a function, and it had the quality of having been occupied by one person managing it at the level of maintenance rather than care. The porch needed attention. The truck in the driveway was not the truck she remembered, which told her something about the 6 months, which was that 6 months had had content she had not been there for. She stood in the trees, and she listened to her father's heartbeat. He was inside. He was moving. She could track the movement by the quality of the sound, the specific rhythm of Charlie Swan's particular walk, which she had been listening to since before she could remember it as something she had consciously memorized. He was in the kitchen. He was making breakfast, which was what he did at this hour, because it was what he did at every hour that was this hour, the pattern so established that the deviation from it would have been the remarkable thing. She stood in the trees, and she thought about whether she was going to go closer. She went to the edge of the yard. Not the porch. She understood the difference between the edge of the yard and the porch. Understood it not as a principle, but as the felt quality of a boundary she was not going to cross. Because crossing it was the thing that would take the morning from the category it was in to a different category. She stood at the edge of the yard, and she looked at the house, and she listened. He was at the table now. She could hear the quality of his movement settling into the chair, the specific, heavy quality of a man sitting down to eat alone that was different from the quality of sitting down to eat with someone, a quality she had not known she knew and found that she did. He coughed once. She listened to the cough with the specific, focused attention of someone who had had to learn to receive human biological information at full resolution and had learned what things meant. The cough was not the influenza. She had become familiar with the influenza's acoustic signature across October and had not lost the familiarity. The cough was ordinary, the cough of a man eating breakfast too fast or not sleeping well or simply existing in the way that living things coughed without it meaning anything. He was alive. He was alive, and he was making breakfast at the right hour, and the truck in the driveway was a different truck, but the quality of the house was the quality of the man she knew, which was the quality of someone managing, which was all she had ever asked of him and all she had ever asked of herself on his behalf. She stood in the yard, and she let the knowledge settle. He was alive. He did not know she was. These two facts had the specific relationship she had been working out since Pennsylvania. They were both true, and the truth of the second did not make the truth of the first less significant. He was alive. That was the fact that mattered for the purposes of standing in the yard. The second fact was the one that required the standing in the yard to be the yard's edge rather than the porch. She stayed for 40 minutes. She stayed because the 40 minutes were what she had, not in the logistical sense, but in the sense that 40 minutes was what the yard's edge could hold before the holding became something else. Before it became the thing that required a decision she had not yet made, the specific decision about whether there was a version of this, of her life now, in which he was part of it in some form. Some limited, managed, carefully constructed form that did not require her to be what she was not, and did not require him to know what she was. She had not made that decision. She did not make it in the yard. She turned at the 40-minute mark, and she walked back into the trees, and the trees received her the way they always received her, which was completely. And the town was behind her, and the heartbeat receded to the distance that her hearing could reach, and then beyond it. And then the connection between her and the sound of her father being alive in his kitchen was the connection of someone who knew the fact and was walking away from the sound of it. Edward was at the house when she came back. He was in the room that had the west-facing window, which was the room he was always in when she returned from things, the room with the window that gave him the approach angle. She had been learning this about him across 6 months of returns from various kinds of things. The specific, repeated choice of the room that gave him information about what was coming before it arrived. He looked at her. She had been gone long enough that he had been managing what she was managing, which was not her thoughts, still not her thoughts, the room still closed, but the quality of the morning that had produced this quality of her return. "He's alive," she said. "Yes," he said. "He's alone," she said. "The house has the quality of, he's managing it alone." "Yes," he said. She sat down. "I stood in the yard," she said, "for 40 minutes. I didn't," she paused. "I need to think about what the next version of it is, whether there is a next version." Edward sat beside her. He did not offer an opinion on whether there was a next version, which was the correct response. This was the specific quality she had come to rely on him for. The distinction between the things that were hers to decide and the things that were available for joint decision-making, and he had learned, across 6 months of Ohio arguments and Wisconsin afternoons, and the specific curriculum of 2 people figuring out what being together inside a permanent existence looked like, to make that distinction correctly. "Carlisle might know," she said, "if there's a version that works." "Yes," he said. "He's done this before. Different circumstances. But the structure of the question, tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. She looked at the window. The April afternoon was doing the specific April afternoon thing, not fully committing to warmth but making the case for it. The light with the quality of something that had been away and was making its return at the measured pace of something that understood the return mattered more than the arrival's speed. She was back in Washington. Her father was alive 40 minutes north. What came next was the question that the next months were going to need to answer, and the next months were available for that purpose. And she was going to bring the question to Carlisle tomorrow, and today she was going to sit at the window and receive the April afternoon at full resolution and let it be what it was. Edward sat beside her. The window held them. The Quileute came to them first. This was the fact that Carlisle had not fully anticipated, which was notable because Carlisle anticipated most things, had built. Across 3 centuries, the specific infrastructure of anticipation that allowed a vampire to move through the human world without the accumulating errors that led to the kind of attention that ended in Volterra. He had anticipated the Quileutes' awareness of their presence on the peninsula. He had not anticipated that they would make the first contact. The man who came to the house outside Forks on a Tuesday morning in May was not the chief, which was itself information. He was younger. Bella placed him at 25 by the specific quality of his face and the way he carried his authority, which was with the awareness of someone who had recently come into it rather than someone who had lived inside it for decades. He came alone. He came to the front door rather than to the perimeter, which communicated something about the visit's intended register. Carlisle met him at the door. She and Edward were in the west room. Edward heard the conversation. She knew this because she could read the quality of his listening face from 6 feet away, which was the quality it had when the information arriving was significant rather than ambient. He was receiving it at 2 channels simultaneously, the words, which she could hear herself at the resolution her hearing provided, and the thoughts underneath the words, which she received as the quality of Edward receiving them. "He knows what we are," Edward said. "Quietly, yes," she said. "He knew before he came," Edward said. He has a category for us. It's not our category. It's older than our category." He paused. "He's not afraid." "Is that a problem?" she said. "I don't know yet," he said. The conversation at the door was being conducted with the specific, careful quality of 2 people who had independently determined that this meeting was necessary and were managing the awkwardness of the determination being mutual rather than unilateral. Carlisle was using the voice he used when he was operating in his oldest register, the voice underneath the physician's warmth. The voice of 300 years of having been the person in the room who had to find the workable path through a situation that did not have an obvious one. The young man's name was Levi Yulee. She filed it. The formal meeting happened a week later, at a location between the Kiliud Reservation and the territory they occupied, chosen by neither party and agreed to by both, which was the specific quality of a neutral location, defined by its relationship to the parties rather than by any intrinsic quality of the ground. Ephraim Black was the chief. He came with 3 others, which was the same number as Carlisle's party, Carlisle, Edward, Bella, which communicated something about the meeting's framing, the symmetry deliberate. The equal numbers, the specific gesture of a negotiation rather than a confrontation. Ephraim Black had the quality of someone who had been the chief for long enough that the being the chief was not something he was performing. He looked at Carlisle, and he looked at Edward, and he looked at Bella, with the same comprehensive attention. The look of someone for whom the 3 of them were a single fact requiring a single assessment rather than 3 separate assessments requiring separate registers. He said, in English, "You're the 3rd one from the south." Carlisle said, "Yes." "The other 2 are older," Ephraim said. "Yes," Carlisle said. "She's not." He was looking at Bella. "No," Carlisle said. "She is." He paused. In the specific way he paused when he was navigating language that did not have a clean path through the truth. She was human here. She was from this area. She knew it before. Ephraim looked at her directly. "Forks," she said. "My father lives in Forks. I stood at the edge of his yard 3 weeks ago." She held Ephraim's eyes. "I couldn't go closer." The quality of his assessment shifted. Not softened, shifted, which was a different thing, the reorganization of an evaluation around new information rather than the reduction of its intensity. Edward, beside her, was very still. She understood from the quality of his stillness that he was receiving something from Ephraim's thoughts, and was managing the receiving carefully, which was what he did when what he was receiving was something he needed to process before it arrived in his face. She would ask him later. The treaty took 3 meetings. The first was the meeting where they established what each party already knew about the other, which was more than either party had expected the other to know. The Kiliute tradition had names for what the Cullen family were. The names were not flattering. Carlisle received the names with the specific, practiced equanimity of someone who had received unflattering names in many languages across 3 centuries, and had arrived at the position that the names said more about the history that produced them than about the thing being named. The second meeting was where they established what each party needed. The Kiliute needed the protection of their people and their land, not from Carlisle's family specifically, but from the category of being that Carlisle's family represented. The category that the Kiliute tradition had documented across generations of encounters that were not all like this encounter. They needed the assurance that the peninsula would not become the thing it had been in the documented encounters. Carlisle's family needed the territory, needed the cloud cover, needed the remoteness, needed the specific quality of the Olympic Peninsula that made residence possible in a way that most locations did not. They needed each other's tolerance. The third meeting was where they built the terms. She contributed to the terms. This was not what Ephraim had expected, and it was not what Carlisle had fully anticipated either, though Carlisle's expression when she spoke had the quality of something that had occurred to him as possible and was now being confirmed. She had grown up managing a shop's operations and a family's finances, and the gap between what was and what was being said about it, and she had spent 6 months managing the specific operational complexity of what she was. And she had stood at the edge of her father's yard and understood the distance between what she needed and what was available. She understood negotiation. The boundary needs to be legible, she said, not marked, natural, something that both parties can find without reference to documentation, because documentation degrades and the people who remember documentation change. She looked at Ephraim, the river, the Kalawa. That's a natural line, and both parties can maintain it without reference to anything outside of themselves. Ephraim looked at her. "You know this land," he said. "I grew up adjacent to it," she said. "I know where the natural boundaries are." He was quiet. "The biting clause," she said. "No biting of humans needs to be explicitly stated. That's the specific fear the tradition documents. The turning, the creation of more of us. Carlisle's family feeds on animals. That practice needs to be stated and committed to, and if it's ever violated, the treaty is void." She paused. "On our side. If the treaty is violated on ours, the Kiliute's obligation to silence is also void. That's the reciprocal that makes it real." Ephraim looked at her for a long moment. He said, "You're offering accountability." "Yes," she said. "It's the only offer worth making." The three men with Ephraim were exchanging looks with the quality of people who had anticipated a different kind of meeting. Edward, beside her, said nothing. His stillness had the quality of the closed room, the closed windows, the specific quality of being beside someone who did not need his contribution and was not a smaller thing for not needing it. "The human," Ephraim said, not unkindly, the way he said everything, with the flat, precise quality of someone naming a fact. "Who is your father?" "Charlie Swan," she said. "He's alive. He doesn't know what I am." She held Ephraim's eyes. "He can't. That's the part I can't negotiate." Ephraim was quiet. "If he ever comes to you," she said. Asking, "If he looks for me, and the looking brings him to your people, we'll keep the silence," Ephraim said. She received this. "Thank you," she said. The third meeting ended at dusk, which was the specific Quileute chosen conclusion time, the treaty signed in the last light of the day, the specific symbolism not explained and not needing to be. She understood it from the quality of its choosing. She had a very good filing system. She filed it. Forks, Washington, October 2004. 86 years of storms. This was the specific quality of what it meant to play baseball in a clearing on the Olympic Peninsula across 8 decades. The accumulation of the individual storms, each one received at full resolution. The specific inventory of October storms in Washington building in her memory the way all things built in her memory now. Which was completely and without the graceful degradation that human memory applied to things it needed to make livable. She remembered every storm. She was not tired of the storms. This was the thing she had not fully understood in October of 1918, when understanding had been the specific, compressed project of simply surviving the first days of what she was. She had not understood that the resolution was not a condition to be managed, but a gift to be grown into. That what felt in the first weeks like the overwhelming volume of everything would become, across decades, the thing she was most grateful for. The storms arrived at full resolution. She was grateful for the storms. The family had grown. This was the other thing that 86 years produced, not just the accumulation of her own experience, but the accumulation of people. The specific committed project that was Carlisle's family, the family that had been 3 and was now 7, and had the quality of a thing that had been built rather than assembled, built in the specific way of things constructed with intention across a long duration. Emmett had been first, found in the Cumberland Mountains of Tennessee in 1935 by Rosalie, who had been third and whose joining had had the specific quality of everything Rosalie did, dramatic, reluctant, and ultimately complete. Jasper had come in 1950 with Alice, the two of them arriving together the way she and Edward had arrived in Carlisle's care together, with the specific quality of people who had already found each other before they found the family. She had understood Alice immediately. She had understood Jasper slightly less immediately, which was the quality of Jasper. He required the longer acquaintance, because the shorter acquaintance gave you only the surface, which was the surface of someone who was managing something considerable. And the longer acquaintance gave you what was being managed, which was the thing that was actually interesting. The family. She was part of it in the way that she was part of things she had committed to completely, which was the way she was part of everything she had committed to, without the reservation that made partial commitment available, without the door left open that allowed for a different configuration. She was part of the family the way she was Edward's, which was to say without remainder. The storm arrived at 6:15. Alice had seen it coming, which was the function Alice served in the family that no one had been serving before her, which was the function of knowing what was coming before it arrived. She had announced the storm at breakfast with the specific, delighted quality of someone who had identified that a thing they enjoyed was on its way and was not going to perform the enjoying at anything below full expression. The clearing was 15 miles from the house, which was the distance required to give Edward's gift the range it needed to function below its most taxing register when the family was assembled in one place. A clearing with 7 vampires in it was a clearing with the thoughts of 7 vampires in it, and even after 86 years, the thoughts of 6 other people at close range was the specific, accumulated weight that Edward had learned to manage but had not learned to not notice. She understood this. She understood it the way she understood everything about him now, which was at the full resolution of 86 years of continuous, complete attention. "The north approach," she said, as they ran. "Yes," he said. He was beside her in the way he was always beside her, not behind. Not in front, the specific configuration of two people who had been running together for long enough that the configuration was not a decision. There are others in the north, she said. It was not a question. He was quiet for 3 strides. 3, he said. Coming from the north. They've been tracking the storm. Tracking us, she said. Tracking the storm, he said. They don't know we're here yet. She filed the distinction. The game had been running for 40 minutes when the nomads came through the northern tree line. Carlisle had them stop, the specific immediate reorganization that the family had practiced and was good at. The dispersal from the game's geometry to a different geometry. The one where positions were not about fielding a ball, but about the field itself. About what was coming and who was where in relation to it. She stood beside Edward. He was reading them at range, and she was reading him, which was the system they had. She received the world at full resolution, and he received the thoughts at range. And the combination was the specific, useful quality of two people whose capabilities complemented each other without duplicating. The blonde one, Edward said very quietly. He's a tracker. The thinking is, it's the thinking of someone who's identified a problem he finds interesting and is building the approach to the interesting problem. What's the interesting problem? She said. That's the part I'm working on, he said. The 3 nomads emerged from the trees. The woman had red hair, and the quality of someone whose function in the group was not the same as the blonde man's function. She was oriented toward him in the specific way of a companion rather than a partner. The difference between someone who was alongside something and someone who was of it. The third, the one with the dreadlocks, had the quality she had been reading in humans for 86 years before she understood it applied to vampires too, which was the quality of someone who was here and was not committed to here, who was present by inertia rather than by decision. Carlisle greeted them. She listened to the greeting with the specific attention she brought to things that were proceeding in a direction she was not certain about. The blond man's name, which Carlisle drew out with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this for centuries, was James. James was looking at her. Not the way vampires looked at each other in these encounters, which was the mutual, comprehensive assessment of position and capability and threat level. He was looking at her with the specific quality of interest that was not about threat level. Edward beside her said, "He can't hear you." She said, "I know." "He's noticed he can't hear you," Edward said. The thinking has shifted. He was tracking the storm, and now he's tracking the specific quality of the gap in his range. "The gap," she said. "Where your thoughts should be," Edward said. "The closed room. He's encountered it. He's a tracker, and he's found a gap in the thing he uses to track, and the gap is interesting," she said. "Yes," Edward said. Carlisle had finished the introductions, and the introductions had the quality of introductions between people who were being careful about the specific register they were establishing. Warm enough to not be hostile, specific enough to not be open-ended. Carlisle was very good at this. James had stopped attending to the introductions. "He wants to know how long you've been a vampire," Edward said, very quietly. "He's trying to place the scent against the gap, trying to determine whether the gap is a gift or a condition. And," she said, "he can't determine it," Edward said. "The gap is," he paused. "He's describing it to himself as a room that doesn't have a door. He's a tracker. He finds rooms without doors." She looked at James across the clearing. He was looking at her with the specific quality of a man who had found something that did not fit his taxonomy and found the not fitting more interesting than the fitting. She said, "Is he a problem?" Edward was quiet for a moment. "He's a variable," he said. She held James's gaze across the clearing with the complete, unhurried attention that 86 years of full resolution had built into her way of seeing things. She held it until he was the one who looked away, which was the specific, small information of someone who had found the thing they were looking at more significant than they had initially registered. "Then we manage the variable," she said. "Together," he said. "Together," she said. The clearing held the storm overhead, the thunder rolling in at the specific intervals that October Pacific weather produced, and the 7 Cullens were in it, and the 3 nomads were in it. And the variable was what it was, and she was managing it with the same system she had been managing everything for 86 years, which was completely, without remainder. The clearing dispersed in the specific way of things that have been managed well and have not resolved cleanly. Carlisle had concluded the encounter with the nomads at the point where the conclusion was available, the introductions completed, the register established, the specific information exchanged that needed to be exchanged. The nomads were moving south and east through the peninsula and had their own trajectory, and the trajectory, as presented by Laurent with the diplomatic care of someone managing a situation he had not originated and was not fully aligned with, did not intersect with the Cullen territory in any way that required formal address. This was the surface of the information. The surface of the information was not the information. She understood this from the specific quality of the hour after the clearing, from the way the family moved back through the forest toward the house with the compressed forward attention of people for whom the movement was covering the assessment, who were running the situation through the internal accounting while the external performance of the return trip proceeded. Edward ran beside her, and she read his face. The family council happened in the main room. This was the formation the family had developed across decades. Not a table, not a formal arrangement, the specific organic distribution of 7 people in a room who all understood what the room was for and were in it. Carlisle at the center. Esme near the east window. Rosalie and Emmett at the room's far end. Jasper near the entrance, which was the position Jasper occupied in rooms where he needed the full range for his gift to cover the space. Alice on the arm of the chair. She was beside Edward. James is a tracker, Carlisle said. Edward's assessment during the encounter was that the tracking instinct had oriented toward Bella specifically. Toward the gap, Edward said. Explain the gap, Rosalie said. He explained it the way he explained things about the gift, with the specific care of someone who had learned, across 86 years, the difference between explaining what the gift did and explaining what the gift felt like. He explained the gap as the room without a door, which was the description that had the most clarity for people who had not encountered the gap from the outside. Rosalie looked at Bella. You've been a problem waiting to happen, Rosalie said. Not unkindly, with the flat, accurate quality she brought to statements that were true and she felt were not being addressed with sufficient directness. Rosalie, Esme said. It's accurate, Rosalie said. The gap is the specific thing that makes a tracker's instinct activate. A tracker's gift is the complete directed finding of things that can be found. A thing that cannot be found is the thing that a tracker cannot ignore. She held Bella's eyes with the cold, assessing attention. This was always going to happen. The only question was when. The question now, Bella said, is what we do about when having been today. Rosalie was quiet. She's right, Jasper said. The when is settled. The response to the when is the discussion. She presented her analysis. She had been building it in the forest, during the run back from the clearing, during the first 10 minutes of the room's settlement before the discussion began. She had been building it with the same system she had been building things since 1918, which was the system of a person who had managed the gap between what was and what was being said about it for long enough that the management was faster than the awareness. James will come back, she said. Not because we're a threat. Because I'm an anomaly and he's a tracker, and the anomaly is more compelling than any other variable in his experience right now, which is the experience of someone who has been finding things for 200 years and has not encountered a thing he could not find. She looked at the room. He'll construct a hunt because the hunt is the structure that his gift requires for the finding to feel like finding. The hunt requires a target, and the hunt requires a chase, and the target and the chase will be me. Then we run, Emmett said. With the quality of someone who had said the obvious thing and was waiting for someone to explain why the obvious thing was not going to happen. We can't all run, she said. If all of us run, we're 7 vampires moving together across the country with a tracker's gift following the trail, and the trail is enhanced by the volume of it. 7 people leaving a combined scent is not a small trail. And Laurent told us they're moving south and east, which means the southern and eastern routes are compromised as clean exits. What then? Carlisle said. We split, she said. The split has to have a specific logic or the tracker will identify it as a decoy rather than a genuine dispersal. The logic is this. The anomaly is mine. The hunt is for me. If I move in the direction that makes the most tactical sense for a target trying to maximize the gap between itself and a tracker, which is away from the sense concentration, which is away from the family, then the tracker's gift tells him I'm the genuine movement and the family is the noise. You're proposing to run alone, Edward said. I'm proposing to run with you, she said. The 2 of us are the anomaly. You're the only one who can read his approach through the gift. The 2 of us together give me the early warning and give you the closed room, which is the one place you're not receiving his thoughts when you're receiving everything else. Edward was very still. And the rest of the family, Carlisle said. Disperses in 3 directions, she said. Alice and Jasper north, Carlisle and Esme east, Rosalie and Emmett south, which is the direction that has the decoy quality. They're the biggest physical presence, and a tracker following a scent will receive them as the primary thread. She looked at Rosalie. You'd be drawing him. Rosalie looked at Emmett. Emmett looked at Bella. You've been thinking about this since the clearing, Emmett said. Yes, she said. While we were running back, he said. While we were running back, she said. He made the specific sound, the one that had been in his register since 1935. The one she had filed as the sound of him acknowledging that someone had done something he was going to choose to find impressive, rather than irritating. Phoenix, Alice said. Everyone looked at her. She was in the slightly displaced mode of receiving and reporting. And the slight displacement had the quality of something that had arrived at a specific word rather than a general direction. Phoenix, she said again. The destination, if you're going to run. Not north, not east, south and then west. Phoenix is warm and dry, and the distance from here is the maximum available on this continent without crossing water. And the scent trail through a desert environment doesn't hold the same way it holds here. She looked at Bella. That's where the logical target goes, if you're the target and you're running. Bella had not thought of Phoenix. She thought of Phoenix now. My mother, she said. Renee moved to Phoenix after my father. She stopped. She looked at the room. My mother is in Phoenix. The room received this. He might find her, Carlisle said, quietly, if he thinks she's leverage, Edward said. She's leverage, Bella said. She's the only human I've been thinking about since you said the word Phoenix, and I've been thinking about it for 30 seconds, which means he's been thinking about it longer. We need to reach her first, Alice said. Can you? Bella started. I'm already looking, Alice said. I can't see her specifically without knowing her, but I can see the general shape of Phoenix in the next 48 hours. And the shape is, she paused. Go now, I'll watch and I'll update. Carlisle looked at Bella. Bella looked at Edward. Edward looked at her with the quality that 86 years had built into the looking, which was the quality of someone who had been finding the same thing every time they looked at the same person, and had not become accustomed to finding it. Now, he said. Now, she said. They went. The Phoenix Ballet Studio had been chosen for its geometry. This was not the first time she had chosen a space for its geometry. She had been making tactical choices since 1918. Since the first months when the operational reality of what she was had required the development of an operational mind to manage it, and the operational mind had been built on the foundation of what she had already been, which was a girl who ran a bookshop's inventory at 14 and was not surprised to find that the inventory skills transferred. The studio on Destine Street was on the southeastern edge of the studio district, with a rear parking access that allowed approach from the direction that had the best wind for managing scent, 2 emergency exits in addition to the main entrance, and an interior divided by the mirror wall that ran the length of the east side and created the secondary corridor that she had identified in the first. 60 seconds of moving through the space. The mirrors were the specific advantage. She had been in this building once before, in 1932, when it was a different kind of building and the geometry had been different, and she had filed the geometry the way she filed everything, without knowing when it would be useful. She had known, standing in the parking lot 20 minutes ago, that it was useful now. Edward was at the studio's west entrance. She was at the center. James came through the east entrance. He came through it with the quality he had arrived at the clearing with, the forward, committed movement of something that had identified its destination and was in the execution phase, except the clearing had been the beginning, and this was the end. And the quality had the compression of something that had been running toward this point for 48 hours and had arrived at the compressing of it. He looked at her. She had not managed to look surprised. This did not appear to surprise him. You came here alone, he said. Yes, she said. The husband didn't want you to, he said. No, she said. He's outside. He respects my choices. James looked at her with the quality she had been receiving since the clearing, the quality of someone who had been cataloging an anomaly and was now in the room with the anomaly at close range and was finding it more significant in person than in the abstract. You've been doing this for 86 years, he said. I tracked your origin. Chicago, 1918, Carlisle, Cullen turned you. Yes, she said. And the husband, he said. At the same time, she said. Same week, same illness. He tilted his head. That's why the gap is yours, he said. Not a gift he gave you, not a gift Carlisle brought with him, something that was in you before and came through the turn. He paused. 200 years of tracking and I've found exactly 4 people whose minds were closed to external gifts. None of them were like you. How were the others? She said. Blank, he said. Closed. The gap in the range, yes, but the gap is an absence. Nothing present on the other side of it. He looked at her. Yours is different. Yours is closed in the way a room is closed. Something in there. Not visible, not accessible, but not absent. Yes, she said. It extends, he said. I noticed in the clearing. The gap has a perimeter, and the perimeter moves. When you walked toward the Cullen family, the perimeter moved with you, and the gap extended to cover the area you moved into. She had not known, until he said it, that this was what she did. She had known she was doing something without knowing its mechanism. She had known since the first feed in the slaughterhouse district in 1918. When Carlisle had said your shield, with the quality of someone naming a thing they had been observing and had decided deserved a name, she had built the 86 years on the foundation of the shield without ever having a clear account of what the shield did from the outside. James had a clearer account of what the shield did from the outside than she did. She filed this for later. You came here to understand it, she said. I came here to find it, he said. Finding is different from understanding. A tracker finds. Understanding is what happens after finding, if you survive the finding. If you survive the finding, she said. Trackers usually survive, he said. That's the nature of the gift. You find things. The things you find are found, not the other way. This time, she said, is different. He looked at her. You said it yourself, she said. The perimeter moves. The gap extends to cover what's in proximity. She held his eyes. You're in proximity. She pushed. The push was the mechanism she had been managing for 86 years without fully understanding it, and in the moment of using it against James, she understood it for the first time, with the complete, simultaneous understanding that the new existence had given her for everything. Understood it from the inside, the full available account of what it was and what it did. It was not force in the physical sense. It was the extension of the perimeter, the shield's boundary moving outward, rapidly into the space between her and James, and the extension arriving at James's gifts the way all external forces arrived at her own mind, which was to not arrive at all, to find the door and find it closed. James's gift, the tracking, the specific consuming orientation toward finding things, found the perimeter and found nothing on the other side of it. Not her finding. Not an absence of finding. The specific quality of a gift that had stopped working. He went still. She had been watching vampires go still for 86 years, and this still was not the still she was used to. Was not the managed stillness of someone who was choosing stillness as a management method. This was the still of something whose primary channel had been disrupted, and was running the diagnostic before it reached for the secondary channels. He was fast. She had known he would be fast. This was the information she had been building since the clearing. Since the first 48 hours of Alice watching his approach through her visions, since the conversation in the car with Edward about what the tracking gift looked like from inside the thoughts of a tracker. Fast was the word Edward had used, and fast was the correct word, but fast had a specific meaning in the context of 86 years of being something that was also fast. And the specific meaning was that fast was a comparison between two fast things rather than an absolute quality. He came from the left. Edward came through the west entrance. She had not asked him to come through the west entrance at this specific moment. She had asked him to be at the west entrance. The specific moment was his. The specific moment of when his gift told him that the left approach was the committed approach, which was the thing his gift could do that hers could not, which was the thing that made the two of them the specific combination they were. He was between James and the mirror wall before James had finished committing to the approach. The mirror wall. The mirror wall and its secondary corridor and the specific geometry she had chosen the studio for, which was the geometry of a space that had angles that a committed approach became a committed disadvantage in when the person being approached was not in the position the approach was aimed at. What the next 4 minutes contained was not something she would construct into a narrative. This was the thing she had understood about violence across 86 years of occasionally necessary engagement with it, that the narrative of it was always wrong. That the narrative implied sequence and consequence and the specific structure of meaningful events, and what violence actually was the rapid, unglamorous execution of a problem through methods that were adequate for the Execution. She and Edward were adequate for the execution. He had 100 years of managed, contained capability behind him. Capability that had been built alongside the specific, intimate knowledge of how she moved and where she was going to be before she was there, which was the specific advantage of a telepath in a physical engagement, not the reading of the opponent's mind. Though that was present, but the reading of the partners, the constant, complete account of where she was and what the next 3 seconds of her movement were going to be, and the ability to be where she needed him to be before she needed him there. She had 86 years of the shield. The shield in an engagement was not a defensive instrument only. She had learned this, had learned it in the specific way she learned things that she needed to learn, because the alternative was an outcome she would not accept, that the shield's extension could be managed in the same way she managed everything, with the operational precision of someone who had been building the management for a very long time. She extended it selectively. Over herself, always. Over Edward, when the extension served the engagement. Over James, never. The selective extension meant that James was fighting two people who could read each other completely and a target he could not track through any available channel. Because the tracking gift, the finding, the specific consuming orientation, had found the perimeter and was finding it every time it reached. And the reaching cost something, and the costing was the variable that resolved the engagement. It resolved in 4 minutes and 12 seconds. She had been counting. Afterward, the studio held the quality of aftermath, which was not quiet and was not loud. The quality of a space that had been used for something and was now simply the space that had been used for it. The air and the light and the mirror wall unchanged by what they had witnessed. Edward was beside her. He had the quality he had had at the house in Pennsylvania when she had come back from the yard's edge. Not relief, not the performance of relief, but the thing underneath relief. The thing that arrived when the accounting was complete, and the complete accounting produced an answer you had needed to be true. She was looking at the mirror wall. The mirror wall was intact. The mirrors, she said. Yes, he said. I chose this place for the mirrors, she said. Backup geometry. Yes, he said. I know. We didn't need them, she said. No, he said. She looked at the mirror wall and saw them in it, the two of them, pale, still, the quality of the new existence in both of them visible at the angle the mirror provided, the angle of something seen from slightly outside its own awareness. 86 years. Victoria, she said. She ran, he said. After the first minute. Alice will have seen it. She'll come back, Bella said. Eventually, he said. When the grief becomes, he paused, when it becomes the thing that grief becomes. We'll manage it then, she said. Yes, he said. She looked at the mirror. He looked at the mirror. They had the quality they had at every window they had stood at together across 86 years. Not the quality of two people who had arrived somewhere together, but the quality of two people who had been going somewhere together for so long that the arriving and the going had become the same quality of the same thing. She had told him in Pennsylvania that they were each other's context. The mirror was the specific, clear account of what 86 years of context looked like. She filed it. She had a very good filing system. They went to find Alice. Forks, Washington, October 2004. 3 weeks after Phoenix. Victoria did not come back immediately. This was Alice's assessment, delivered in the specific. Careful register she used when what she was seeing had the quality of certainty, but the timeline was not clean. The vision was clear and the timeline was not, which was the quality of futures that depended on grief's timeline, which was the quality of futures that the most experienced seer could not pin to a date, because grief did not operate on a date. She'll wait, Alice said, until the waiting is over. And then, Bella said, and then we'll manage it, Alice said, the way we manage everything. She filed this. Charlie Swan came to the house. This was not part of any plan and was not something she had arranged. It was the specific outcome of a variable she had not fully accounted for, which was the specific small-town quality of Forks, which was that in a small town the arrival of two young people coincident with the departure of a threat that had been making itself known in the area's animal population created a chain of connection that a police chief spent 19 years learning to follow. He came to the door on a Tuesday morning. She heard his truck on the road before she heard the engine stop. She heard the engine stop before she heard the door. She heard the door before she heard his footsteps on the porch, and she had 22 seconds of hearing her father approach the door of the house she lived in, and she used the 22 seconds to decide what the next 5 minutes were going to be. She opened the door before he knocked. He looked at her. She looked at him. He had the quality she had been receiving at the yard's edge for 86 years in her memory, the specific, managed quality of a man who carried things by carrying them rather than by putting them down, who had been managing the thing he was carrying since October of 1918, with the same, continued, daily commitment to managing it. He was older. She had been watching him age in the specific, complete way that she had been receiving everything across 86 years, which was to say that she had the full account of every version of his face from the one she had known in 1918 to this one. She loved him. This was not a thing she had needed to arrive at. It was simply the thing that was the case. Had been the case since 1918 when she had stood at the edge of the yard and listened to his heartbeat in the kitchen, and was the case now at full resolution, which was the only resolution available to her for anything she cared about. "Bella," he said. "Dad," she said. He looked at her for a long moment with the quality of someone who had been a police chief for 19 years and had developed. Across those 19 years, the specific kind of looking that was not assessment in the threatening sense, but assessment in the practice sense of someone who needed to understand what they were seeing before they could decide what to do with it. "You look," he stopped. "I know," she said. "You look like you did," he said, "in 1918. You look exactly, I know," she said. "Come in." He came in. The conversation took 2 hours. This was not a conversation she had planned, and was not a conversation she had a script for, because the conversations you most needed to have were the ones that did not have available scripts, the ones that required the complete, present attention of the people in them, without the management of having prepared for them in advance. She told him the truth, not all of it. Not the operational details of what she was and what the last 86 years had contained, not the clearing or the baseball game or the studio in Phoenix. The truth that mattered for a father sitting at a kitchen table looking at a daughter who had not aged in 86 years and who had come back to stand at the edge of his yard more times than she could count, because the yard's edge was what was available. She told him about 1918. She told him about Carlisle. She told him about Edward, who came in from the West Room at the appropriate point in the telling and sat at the table with the quality he sat with when he was in a room where his gift was not the instrument required and his presence was, which was the quality of someone who understood the difference. Charlie looked at Edward. Edward looked at Charlie. "You married my daughter," Charlie said. "Yes," Edward said. "In 1919, Charlie said. "Yes," Edward said. Charlie was quiet for a moment. "Does that count?" he said. "Legally, we've redone the documentation several times," Edward said. "The current version counts." Charlie made the sound. She had not heard this sound from him in 86 years, and she heard it now at full resolution, which was the resolution of someone receiving something she had needed to hear for 86 years, and was receiving it for the first time. The sound he made when he found something funny in a situation that was not primarily funny, which was the specific dry quality of Charlie Swan's humor, which was the quality of someone who managed difficult things by finding the element that was not entirely difficult and noting it out loud. She filed it. She kept the filing. The arrangement that the remaining years of Charlie's life had was not the arrangement she had wanted in 1918 or in 1919 or in any of the subsequent years of standing at the yard's edge. It was the arrangement that was available. He knew. He did not ask questions she could not answer. He asked questions she could answer, and she answered them with the completeness that she brought to things she had committed to completely, and across the years the arrangement built the specific, limited, precious quality of a relationship that had been constructed around what it could be rather than what she had wanted it to be. He died in the spring. She was there. Edward was beside her. The rest of the family was outside, which was the configuration she had asked for, and which the family had honored with the complete, immediate quality that the family had for the things she asked of it, without deliberation, without the performance of agreement, simply the immediate embodiment of it. She sat beside her father's bed in the spring morning and she held his hand, which was warm in the specific way that living things were warm, and she received his heartbeat at full resolution in the way she had been receiving it since 1918. She was receiving it when it stopped. The family was on the porch when she came out, not together, in the distribution they had when they were giving space while being present. The 7-person arrangement of people who understood the difference between company and intrusion and were being the first thing. Edward was beside her. He had come from inside. She looked at the spring morning, which was doing what spring mornings in Forks did, which was to be the specific kind of green and gray that was not a performance of spring, but simply spring in the only register this territory operated in. He was alive for 86 years after 1918, she said. Yes, Edward said. She stopped. That's a good accounting. Yes, he said. She looked at the morning. She received it, the specific quality of the trees and the light and the particular Forks air, received at the full resolution that the new existence had been providing since 1918, which was the resolution she had started in that house in Chicago, when she had opened her eyes and the ceiling was not her ceiling, and everything had arrived at once. Everything still arrived at once. She was still grateful for it. There's something I've been thinking about, she said. Tell me, he said. We started this the same way, she said. The same week. The same illness. The same ceiling that wasn't ours when we woke up. She looked at him. We're going to keep going the same way. Whatever comes next, Victoria when the grief becomes something that moves her. The Volturi when the timeline Carlisle has been watching develops, whatever the next thing is. Yes, he said. Together, she said. Not because there's no other option, because it's the option we keep choosing. He held her eyes with the quality that 86 years had made the most present quality she received from the world, which was the quality of someone for whom finding the same thing every time they looked had not become less significant for the frequency of the finding. Yes, he said. The morning continued. The family was on the porch. The filing system she had been building since 1918 received the morning and received Edward and received the family on the porch, and the filing was complete, which was the quality the filing had always had. She had started 86 years ago with a ceiling that was not her ceiling and everything arriving at once. She had everything. She was keeping it.